There are moments in history when the surface of politics hides something much larger beneath it. Debates fill the halls of Congress, newspapers speak of democracy and freedom, presidents address the nation with solemn confidence, and yet behind these visible institutions, another force quietly shapes the direction of the modern world. To understand the 20th century, its wars, alliances, interventions, and economic transformations, one must look beyond speeches and campaign promises and examine the immense network of corporations, financial groups, industrial monopolies, and international interests that expanded alongside American power after the Second World War. Because hidden within the language of diplomacy and national defense was an extraordinary story. The story of how economic influence became one of the greatest instruments of global power ever assembled. In Washington, congressional hearings often focused on the growing influence of monopolies and the struggles faced by small businesses inside the United States. Senators criticized giant corporations for concentrating wealth, manipulating markets, and exercising influence over public life. Yet while these domestic disputes captured public attention, a far larger transformation was unfolding internationally. The greatest industrial and financial corporations of the United States were rapidly expanding across the globe, investing in oil fields, mining operations, transportation systems, communications networks, electrical industries, agriculture, and banking. What emerged was not simply an expansion of trade, but the construction of a vast international economic system closely connected to American political influence abroad. Many Americans traditionally believed that unlike the European powers of the 19th century, the United States did not possess a colonial empire. Britain ruled colonies. France controlled overseas territories. The old imperial systems of Europe appeared visible and direct. But the modern world introduced a different kind of influence. One rooted less in formal annexation and more in economic penetration, corporate ownership, financial dependence, and strategic alliances. Instead of governors and crowns, there were investment banks, multinational corporations, military agreements, and global markets. The result was an international structure in which economic interests and political power increasingly moved together. At the center of this transformation stood the major industrial monopolies, especially those controlling strategic raw materials such as oil, copper, aluminum, rubber, and steel. These resources were the foundation of industrial civilization. They powered factories, fueled transportation, built military equipment, and sustained modern economies. Control over them meant influence over the direction of global development itself. The largest oil corporations, particularly the Rockefeller interests connected to Standard Oil, expanded enormously during the mid-20th century. Their operations stretched across continents, involving production zones in the Middle East and Latin America, refining systems in Europe, and marketing networks reaching billions of people throughout the capitalist world. Yet these companies rarely acted entirely alone. The global oil industry became increasingly organized through agreements, partnerships, and market divisions among a relatively small group of giant corporations, many of them American, British, or Dutch. The same pattern appeared in other strategic industries. The great copper companies, heavily connected to major banking houses such as the Morgan interests, controlled immense reserves both inside and outside the United States. Their influence extended into Latin America, Africa, and beyond, where mining operations became deeply tied to global finance and industrial production. Aluminum, another critical material in modern industry and aviation, was dominated largely by the Mellon-linked Aluminum Corporation of America, which expanded rapidly during and after World War II. Through ownership of foreign deposits, industrial plants, and partnerships abroad, American corporations increasingly occupied commanding positions within the world economy. What makes this period so important is not merely the existence of large corporations, but the close relationship between economic expansion and political strategy. Foreign policy and economic interests often developed side by side. In many regions of the world, diplomatic pressure, military alliances, aid programs, and strategic interventions coincided with areas containing valuable resources or important investment opportunities. Countries rich in oil, metals, agricultural products, or transportation routes became central to international competition. The language of national security and economic development merged together in ways that profoundly shaped global politics during the Cold War era. At the same time, the balance of power within the capitalist world itself was changing dramatically. Before World War II, European empires still dominated large portions of global trade and colonial possessions. Britain, France, the Netherlands, and other powers maintained enormous overseas systems built over centuries. But the devastation of the war weakened these traditional imperial centers, while the United States emerged economically stronger than ever before. American corporations expanded into regions previously dominated by European capital, purchasing facilities, financing reconstruction, acquiring concessions, and establishing new industrial operations abroad. Programs such as the Marshall Plan not only rebuilt war-torn economies, but also deepened the international role of American finance and industry. Oil offers one of the clearest examples of this transformation. American oil companies dramatically increased their global position after World War II, especially in Venezuela and the Middle East. New refineries were built across Europe, strategic concessions were secured in multiple regions, and partnerships developed between major corporations spanning several countries. Yet cooperation among these giant companies existed alongside intense competition. Agreements divided markets and coordinated production, but rivalries over territory, investment opportunities, and influence remained constant. The international economy became a complex mixture of collaboration and struggle among the largest financial and industrial groups of the era. Banking institutions played an equally important role in this expanding system. Major American banks established foreign branches throughout Latin America, Europe, and Asia, providing financial support for industrial corporations operating overseas. Through loans, investments, and international credit systems, Wall Street gained enormous influence over global economic activity. The growing dominance of the dollar after World War II further strengthened this position, making the United States the financial center of much of the capitalist world. European powers increasingly depended on American capital, while international institutions reflected the rising influence of American finance. The reach of corporate expansion extended far beyond raw materials alone. Manufacturing industries, communications systems, transportation networks, and electrical equipment firms also built extensive international operations. Companies such as Ford and General Motors established assembly plants and production facilities across multiple continents. General Electric and International Telephone and Telegraph developed networks that linked industrial technology, communications infrastructure, and electrical production to global markets. Through investments, patents, licensing agreements, and industrial partnerships, American corporations became deeply woven into the economic fabric of numerous countries. Another important aspect of this history was the rise of international cartels and market agreements. Contrary to the popular belief that capitalist competition functioned entirely through open markets, many major corporations coordinated production levels, prices, territories, and patent sharing through international arrangements. In industries ranging from oil and steel to chemicals and electrical equipment, agreements often existed between large firms from different countries. These arrangements attempted to stabilize profits, regulate competition, and divide global markets among dominant industrial groups. Yet history repeatedly showed that such cooperation remained unstable, especially as different powers grew stronger or weaker over time. The broader consequence of all these developments was the emergence of an international order increasingly centered around American economic influence. By the middle of the 20th century, the United States possessed not only enormous industrial strength at home, but also expanding influence across vast regions of the world through investments, trade networks, military alliances, and financial systems. Entire sectors of foreign economies became closely tied to American corporations and capital. In some regions, this influence operated alongside direct military presence. In others, it functioned through economic dependence, technological leadership, or strategic partnerships. And yet, this history is not simply a story about power or domination. It is also a story about the transformation of the modern world itself. Industrial expansion connected continents more closely than ever before. Resources extracted in one region fueled factories in another. Banking systems linked distant economies together. Political conflicts became inseparable from global markets and international production. The 20th century witnessed the creation of an interconnected world in which economics, politics, industry, and military strategy could no longer be separated. To study this period, therefore, is to explore one of the central questions of modern history: how economic power shapes global influence. Behind the speeches of politicians and the movements of armies stood another reality: the rise of multinational corporations, financial networks, industrial monopolies, and strategic resources as decisive forces in international affairs. Understanding this hidden architecture does not diminish the role of nations or ideals, but it reveals the deeper structures that helped shape the modern age and continue to influence the world even today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, and we invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow us on this journey as we examine the consequences of U.S. imperialism and the voices that challenge its legacy.